Hi, everyone. This is Scott Nybakken for Dynamite Entertainment, and I'm here with writer and longtime Elvira collaborator David Avallone to talk about his latest series starring the mesmerizing Mistress of the Dark, Elvira meets H.P. Lovecraft. David, thanks for joining us on the channel.
My pleasure, as always.
So to begin with, can you give us a quick recap of your history with Elvira and how you came to start writing her adventures for Dynamite?
Sure. My history with Elvira is, I mean, aside from being a fan for years and all of that, is I was just wrapping up the very first run of Biddy Page for Dynamite, and Joe Rybant, the editor-in-chief, or what senior executive editor,
Executive editor, I believe.
executive editor. The title changes every couple of years, so I have to, update. But he was in LA doing some business with Nick Barucci, and said, let's go out to dinner. And he took me out to dinner and said, so we tried to get a comic going with Elvira, and she did not like the first pitch that we gave her with a different team. So we'd like you to give it a try. And I have to say, my initial response coming off of Biddy Page was, is this the niche you guys have for me now? Is I'm the pretty girl who isn't really a comic book character? And of course that ignores the fact that Elvira had 160 something issues with Claypool and 12 with DC and the Marvel, like she's been at every company. But I was not enthusiastic about, just because I didn't feel like, just in terms of doing the work, I didn't feel like there was a really obvious story engine there. Like, what's
Right.
the conflict? What stories do I tell with Elvira? And I went home and told my wife, Augusta, that this had been suggested to me. And she said, oh, no, you're taking it. Because she's a fan and she's like, I want to meet her. And this is my only path to meeting her. So you're taking this job. And then I reached out to Dave Acosta, who I did not know was also a huge Elvira fan. And Dave is an artist who's probably drawn 40 to 50% of the comic pages I've written. And Dave said, no, 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 you're going to get this and I'm going to draw it. And he did this really great thing where he sent me uh, covers and pages from Mad Magazine, from celebrity comics from the 50s, like Jerry Lewis comics and Bob Hope comics. And he sent me some Angel and the Ape pages. And he said, I think where you're getting hung up is you're thinking of this as a horror comic starring Elvira, when it's a satire comedy comic with horror elements and horror overtones. And when I realized that it was about the comedy, I was more willing to do it. And I came up with three pitches. Cassandra picked the time travel one, where she meets Cassandra Peterson, the real Elvira, where she meets Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe. And ironically, issue 4 of that series was going to be H.P. Lovecraft. And for reasons that I'm no will get into, I backed off and went, let's not do that. And I had her show up on the set of Bride of Frankenstein instead in that issue. And then, now it's 33 issues later. We did eventually, the second arc was one of the other pitches that she didn't pick initially, which was Elvira in Hell. And I later found out from Cassandra that she had actually pitched Elvira in Hell as the second Elvira movie a million years ago, and that never came to pass. I'm sure my version of it was very different from whatever they had planned in the late 80s. Um, but yeah, I have found ways to to use the character and to write her and find dramatic situations to put her in and find characters that she's fun to bounce off with. Her long-term villain in the series is Vlad the Impaler, who's just kind of a funny foil for her. Not any movie Dracula, the actual Romanian warrior king
Yeah.
from the 15th century, who, I did make also a vampire because, why not? But he's not a Lugosi vampire. He's a Romanian warlord king vampire. So, it's been a fun run with her.
Yeah, and oh, like over the course of the series that you've done with her so far, it's like she spent a lot of time in like some fantastic realms from films and TV. Um, but the eldritch atmosphere of H.P. Lovecraft's universe is something of a departure from these more lighthearted scenarios.
Yeah.
And Lovecraft himself, of course, is a very polarizing figure. So how are you handling the
Well,
challenge
that
of
was, that was the main decision I had to make going into this was when I decided to do it first, I won't deny Lovecraft is the most popular hated author in the world. Nobody likes the man. Everybody loves playing in his universe. And that was true when he was alive. He famously opened up his universe, the Cthulhu mythos, to be written in by a lot of people, including my late friend Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho, who, when he was a teenager, wrote short stories in the Lovecraft universe and corresponded with Lovecraft. And he shows up as a character in The Haunter in the Dark under the name Robert Blake. So the first decision was, if I'm going to do Lovecraft, I'm not going to do it in one issue. I'm going to do it in 5. And I'm going to deal with him not being a very good person at all.
yeah,
And there's the whole separate the art. The problem I always have with separate the art from the artist is the art is always the artist. Uh, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that all of Roman Polanski's films are about rape.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
so how am I supposed to separate the art from the artist when his most famous 2 films are about a guy who rapes his daughter and a guy who sets his wife up to be raped by Satan? It's like the man's got to focus, and it's part of who he is, and you can't. With Lovecraft, the things that made him a bigot, the thing that made him prejudiced, it's so common that people who are bigoted and prejudiced don't really have any experience of the thing that they hate. They hate it because they're afraid of it because it's the unknown to them. And if it was known to them, they wouldn't hate it so much.
yeah,
And Lovecraft was a hypochondriac, shut in, um, probably an incel. He married, but I don't know that there's any evidence that he actually ever had sex with a woman or man. So what I came to is that it wouldn't be always comfortable, but there's some comedy in a dead racist from the early 20th century having to deal with Elvira, who's a very modern woman who's, Cassandra came out of the closet last year. Not that she was so terribly deep in the closet. The woman's been, the Grand Marshal at Pride parades for about the last 30 years. So her
yeah.
friendliness in that community is hardly a surprise to anyone. So yeah, I deal with I like to think I deal with all of the things that are terrible about him. And I have Elvira mock him for them, and he pretends, uh maybe a little bit of a giveaway to say that he pretends, but he gives some lip service to the idea that he has learned something in the 100 years that he's been, the 90 years he's been dead. He's had some time to think about his life while floating in the abyss, which is where he's coming from when he meets Elvira. So, long answer short, yes, I'm dealing with who he really was and how much trouble he would have with the real world. And in the second issue, he says something about driving in fast cars being unsettling. And she says, Howard, you find seafood unsettling. Like everything unsettles you. That's not good. That's not a positive thing that you're afraid of everything in the world.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, that's the attitude I take to Lovecraft is, I am not rehabilitating him. I am not whitewashing him. Vlad the Impaler is also a character in the comics. Like I'm not, I'm not making Lovecraft out to be anything that he wasn't.
Yeah.
I actually considered calling the comic, instead of Elvira meets HBL, making it Elvira versus Howard Phillips Lovecraft, but I decided that was a little too nail on the head and it might give things away.
Yeah. And speaking of unsettling, when did you first encounter Lovecraft's work, and what was your reaction to it?
My father was a fan, and he had a book called he had a paperback on his shelves called The Dunwich Horror and Other Stories.
Yeah.
And I read that, and that made me interested in Lovecraft's writing. I had already discovered and been a fan of Poe. And if you've discovered Poe and you discover Lovecraft, then you're like, oh, this is what if Poe wrote science fiction? The easiest way to boil Lovecraft down is what if Edgar Allan Poe wrote science fiction? And that appealed to me. I was a science fiction fan when I was a kid, much more so than a horror fan, which I think is still true, though don't tell anybody. I write a lot of horror. And I read the writing and I was interested in it, and again, because of my father being a writer and having colleagues like Robert Bloch, I was able to talk about Lovecraft with someone who knew him, and was friends with him and had an insider view of the Cthulhu mythos. And one of the first things I ever wrote, I wrote a poem. I took it as a challenge to work the names of all of Lovecraft's great old ones into a poem. Because what do you rhyme with Nyarlathotep and Azathoth?
Yeah.
But I did my best and sent that to Block, and he said very nice things about it, which was very encouraging to me as, a 12-year-old or however old I was when I discovered it.
So without like giving too much away, which aspects of Lovecraft's brand of existential terror are you going to be bringing into the new series?
Well, it's funny because I've written Lovecraft in comics before. Betty Page went up against the great old ones in Betty Page Unbound, and I used four of the great old ones as issue villains in that series. It's like most of the stuff that I do. I'm trying to hit as much of the Lovecraft canon that I enjoy. Like they're not one for one trade-offs, but issue 2 is more or less a satire of the Dunwich Horror. Issue 3 is more or less a satire of the Strange High House in the Mist and a little bit of the Haunter in the Dark. Issue 4 is a little bit of a satire of Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. And so I'm hitting the whole cosmology as much as I possibly can. And, one of the things that I think is as I'm a nerd that has a very similar, I'm not comparing my talent to his at all, but Jim Starlin has this obsession with making order out of chaos. And there's no Lovecraft was not world building except one story at a time. And then in any given story, he'd mention elements from another story, but it doesn't all fit together beautifully in a well-ordered cosmology that makes sense. So you kind of have to, when you wade into it, you kind of have to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to take from Lovecraft. The great old ones ruled the earth a billion years ago. The elder gods came along and banished them out of this dimension to their own dimension. A part of that dimension that overlaps with ours is Relia, which is a city in the Caribbean somewhere. That's not always in the real world, but sometimes it is. Like you have to go like, which parts of this do I care about? I'm using his mythology of Dreamland from Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath and from the Silver Key and Through the Gates of the Silver Key and Celephais. And so like one of the primary antagonists, I decided Cthulhu gets done a lot, which, for obvious reasons, he is the Godzilla of
Yes.
this Toho verse. But I've always liked Nyarlathotep because he can be like a gigantic outer space monster and he can also be a phony preacher human being if he decides to wear that outfit. So he's the, for want of a better, he's the primary antagonist walking around on the earth giving Elvira trouble. And there were some cult members in the last arc of the first Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And when she met them, they were in a witch cult, a modern witch cult. And she
Yes.
sort of told them, she broke up the cult and told them to scram. And now they're serving the Nyarlathotep because followers are followers and they will always find a new thing to follow.
Uh, Like that's going to be a fun callback to that
Yeah,
first.
I don't know that anybody will know or care that those are the same characters. I think that trade paperback finally did come out of issues 9 through 12 of
Yeah, like I
Vincent
think it's
Dark.
actually just coming out now.
Yeah, yeah, and I know Meets Vincent Price is coming out soon or has just come out. I don't I'm bad on the release schedules of the trades. But yeah, they were fun characters, and when I realized Nyarlathotep would need some human stooges, there are literally three of them, and they're well-defined goofballs, and I didn't see the need to create another funny bunch of henchmen.
Yeah.
So I went with the funny bunch of henchmen that we see a lot more of them out of their hoods this time. And Cuber, Dave Acosta drew them first, and I think they are recognizably the same three guys if you remember them from
Yeah.
that issue. Though I realized one of them was dressed as a Black Knight in the original series, and you never saw him without his helmet. So Cuber got to invent a face for that guy.
Yeah. And so finally, after embarking on two astral trips, the first with the ghost of Vincent Price and the second with the shade of H.P. Lovecraft, will Elvira be visited by a third spirit in the future?
I, you know,
Potential for a Christmas Carol situation?
I, the funny thing about that is there is a sort of Christmas Carol situation in something coming up with her that I can't talk about,
Uh,
uh, where the ghost that's haunting Elvira is maybe Cassandra Peterson, or maybe Elvira is the ghost haunting Cassandra Peterson. But as far as future team ups, there's nothing on the books yet. Um, this one was completely my idea. The Vincent Price one was suggested because it's the same. Cassandra has the same representation as the estate of Vincent, and I loved that, and that was a great opportunity. It would be great to make the same kind of deal with the estate of Boris Karloff and do
uh,
Elvira meets Boris Karloff. But I mean, of course, now I guess I could do Elvira meets Steamboat Willie.
yeah.
Now that that's out there, and we could wait and see if Disney comes after us. I don't think Nick would like that. But yeah, I have no plans. The next big project with her, I'm about to wrap up writing 125 to 140 page original graphic novel with Cassandra, with Elvira, and I have a feeling that'll be the next big thing after HPL drops and is out in stores. But yeah, I'm writing number 4 of Meets HP Lovecraft now, so we're getting close to wrapping that up too.
Oh, great. Well, David, thanks for taking time out of your grueling schedule to talk today. I had to do it. So everyone, look for the first issue of Elvira Meets H.P. Lovecraft in comic shops in February. And don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.